Olá pessoal, eu sou Samuel de Lima, sou pastor da comunidade Mosaico e diretor do movimento aqui na cidade de São Paulo. E hoje a gente vai ter um papo para conhecer um pouco mais e se aprofundar no que é o Movement Day, quais são as estratégias de avanço do evangelho para a cidade. Eu estou aqui com o Dr. Mac Pier, fundador do Movement Day, ele que tem mobilizado o movimento não só nos Estados Unidos, mas hoje estamos em mais de 300 cidades do mundo, inclusive aqui em São Paulo. Ele é pessoalmente também um mentor para mim e está durante essa semana em que estamos trabalhando na Semana do Movimento São Paulo. A Semana do Movimento São Paulo está acontecendo em vários locais da cidade, com vários líderes, vários palestrantes, mobilizando a cidade para uma década de transformação. E para essa conversa, então, nós vamos conhecer um pouquinho mais a história do movimento, a história do Dr. Mac Pier. Eu vou estar falando em inglês, mas a conversa vai estar aqui legendada. Vamos lá, então. Hello, Mac.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks, Samuel.
Oh, welcome to Brazil.
Thank you.
Mac, we're here promoting Movement Day in Brazil. But before we talk about Movement Day, I'd like you to talk about yourself. So first, tell a little bit about your story and how did you decide to be involved in city movement?
Yeah. Back in 1979, my wife Mari and I were college students, and we attended a missions conference for college students called Urbana. Mm-hmm. And on the fourth night of this conference, there were 17,000 of us, the largest missions conference in the history of the church. And we were challenged by Billy Graham to go anywhere in the world that God would send us. Mm. And as a result of making that commitment, we made several steps. One step took place a few years ago where we traveled to North India in 1983. We were in a part of North India that had a state the size of Nebraska, if you know U.S. geography, but it was a state that had 100 million people in it. And the ratio of Hindus and Muslims to Christians was 100,000 to 1. So in that context, the missions team, we met every Friday and we prayed anywhere from 3 to 9 hours. So that became part of the DNA of our leadership and our vision. A year later, we moved to New York City. We moved to New York thinking that we would be in New York a few years and then go back to India. At the same time, we had our first daughter, and in India, they were only allowing missionaries to come in and out of India 6 months at a time. Okay. So we felt like it was important to stay in New York. So now we've been in New York for over 40 years, and along the way was influenced by a professor, Dr. Ray Bakke. Ray Bakke was asked by Billy Graham in 1974 after the first Lausanne Congress to go study the cities of the world. So Ray went to 250 cities of 1 million or more, and I really do believe that New York was his favorite city. Mm-hmm. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of New York. We spent a lot of time together. I decided to do my doctoral work with Ray from 1998 to 2000. So that was very formational, and it was really about 10 years after being in New York I realized how strategic New York really was, not only to the U.S., but really to the globe. Concurrent with that, Tim Keller arrived in New York in 1989. He planted Redeemer Presbyterian Church, and part of the story there is that the Presbyterian Church of America, that denomination, they had 500 churches praying every day for the successful planting of Redeemer. Wow. Tim told me he had never heard anything that's never happened before or never happened since. Right. So Redeemer gets planted in 1989. I met Tim early on. We both have quite strong InterVarsity backgrounds. And Tim attended several of our meetings in the 1990s. We started bringing churches together to pray together. And then in the year 2000, Tim asked me to co-create with him what was called the Church Multiplication Alliance.
All right.
So pause there. Okay.
Let's pause there.
Okay, sure.
And let's get back to 89.
89, okay.
What was New York like back then?
So in the 80s, New York was really facing three great crises. New York was on the verge of bankruptcy. The city had become very violent. Beginning in 1988, I believe we had eight consecutive years of 8 murders a day in the city. Wow. There was so much death that the city morgue ran out of room. And then and Manhattan was very underchurched. We think that on an island of 1.5 million people, there were about 9,000 people attending Bible-believing churches. So that was the environment that I arrived in, that Tim arrived in, and that's really the backdrop.
Okay, and I read somewhere that Tim saying that when he decided to go to New York, and he and his wife, people would ask him, "Why are you going to New York if there's so many people wanting to leave New York?" Right? So that's a little bit tells a little bit about what New York was like back then.
Yeah, it was very violent. We actually, in the neighborhood where we were living in Flushing, Queens, we had a drug murder in our neighborhood. It was a Chinese couple. They were essentially buying an apartment for their son for his wedding, and when they went to show the apartment, this was just around the block from us. Somebody was attempting an attempted robbery where the robber shot the mother, killed the mother. And then 10 days later, my wife came home from her shift at the hospital working, and when she walked into our apartment, her eyes met the eyes of the man who fit the description of the murderer.
Wow.
So it really felt like all this violence was really in our backyard. She also took our 3 young children to the laundromat one day and got mugged with 3 children in the laundromat. So that was what New York was like at that time. Our neighborhood where we lived, Flushing, we had the highest percentage of car theft in the city at that time. So it was a very challenging environment.
And was it then when you started the Concerts of Prayer?
Concerts of Prayer started in 1988, and it really was in this environment of desperation. I had met some staff at an organization called Here's Life Inner City at the time. They had come to New York in 1976 with what was called the I Found It campaign. They had billboards. They had people calling through phone books just as a form of mass evangelism. And what they were able to achieve was they built a network of about 600 churches that participated. And when we started bringing churches to pray together, they invited that whole network to participate. Our first meeting, February 5th, 1988, we met at my church in Flushing. We invited 16 churches, and 75 churches showed up. So it really spoke to the sense of hunger and desperation that churches had.
Oh, yeah. That's when you met Tim Keller.
So I met Tim. Yes, I met Tim. I think I met Tim in the spring of '87. Tim at that time was doing research on what it would take to plant a church. So we met over the phone, and then I can't remember when we first met in person, but I know Redeemer started in 1989.
Okay. Yeah. So back to 2000.
Yeah. So 2000. So in the year 2000, Tim invited me to have breakfast. And we sat down with a couple other guys from Tim's team, and Tim said, New York needs lots of new churches. He said, they're not all going to be Presbyterian. He said, let's create an alliance of churches that will help start new churches. And the conviction underneath all of it was that churches 10 years and younger are 8 times more effective reaching new people. We formed this alliance. Tim's team provided a lot of training and teaching. I did the early stage fundraising for the effort. We were committed to giving grants to church planners, and we also did a lot of the organizing and convening. So we did that. Officially started in 2003.
Okay.
2009, we wanted to see what progress we were making, so we commissioned research. And the group that we hired, Values Research Institute, was led by a guy by the name of Tony Carnes. Tony's team drove up and down every street in New York, and they captured a census of 7,100 Pentecostal evangelical churches, mainly in the outer boroughs, not as much in Manhattan.
Right.
But they surveyed all these churches, and they realized that from 1989 to 2009, there was a 300% growth of the church, but the majority of it happened after the alliance was started.
Wow.
So 39% of the churches in Manhattan had been started since 9/11.
Wow.
So it spoke to the power of forming an alliance and this idea that movements are always preceded by alliances.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's a interesting fact. So you always tell in your teachings about the moments of disruptive moments in history of New York and the importance of that for movements too. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes. The basic premise in looking at New York history is that God has allowed these disruptive moments that really has shaped the city spiritually. A disruptive moment in American history, for example, was the Civil War.
Right.
You know, we had 4 million enslaved Africans. And then in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. The Civil War ends in 1865. And when the war is over, a number of free slaves migrate to the north. And in terms of American church history, there were more African Americans that came to faith between 1865 and 1900 than any other ethnic group in the history of the United States.
Okay.
So a lot of these first generation Christians moved to the urban north. And so that was really this movement of all these African American churches in our city. And that has been a dominant force in the spiritual pilgrimage of the city. And one of the great contributions of the African American church in America has been the fact that it's really been the social conscience of our society coming out of all of this oppression and then into this. So that was a moment. I would say another moment would have happened during the Great Depression. Stock market crashes, 1929, and then all these people are thrown out of work. And that parallels what happened, a little bit what happened in the 1850s. The 1857, we had also the equivalent of a stock market crash.
Right.
And there was a praying businessman by the name of Jeremiah Lanphier, and he called for a midday prayer meeting. First prayer meeting, 6 people showed up. Second prayer meeting, 14 showed up. By the fourth prayer meeting, there was 40, and they decided to continue. Within weeks, they had 10,000 people praying every day.
Wow.
And God used that prayer meeting. It spread to southward to Philadelphia, northward to Boston. And within 2 years, out of a population of 35 million, I believe there were 2 million conversions.
Wow.
So that was a very important moment at a time of economic crisis. 9/11, we had 3,000 people that died on one day in New York. It was the greatest loss of life on American soil in American history. And coming out of that, it really caused many organizations to begin to work together that hadn't worked together before. In fact, 9/11 really just preceded the Church Multiplication Alliance. 9/11 gave a sense of urgency to a lot of things that were happening. So I really credit the church's response to 9/11 as really helping shape really the spirituality of New York for the last generation.
Wow, that's interesting, and it's impressive. So back to the alliance, right? How did it work? What did the alliance do?
Yeah. So basically, in this case, let me just say generally about how an effective alliances work. An alliance requires a really healthy church network, churches and leaders that already know each other. And then secondly, you have an entity, oftentimes it's a national or global organization that has great expertise.
Right.
In this case, city to city, fantastic expertise in church planning.
Yeah.
And they're brought together around a really big idea. So the big idea in our Church Multiplication Alliance was, what would happen if we grew evangelical Christianity from 1% to 10%?
Right.
10% represents this tipping point societally. And interestingly enough, we began the alliance in 2003. 2019, before COVID began, the 3% became 7.5%. And the 7.5%.
So we're talking about 19 years?
16 years.
16 years.
So in 16 years, the number of new people attending church in Manhattan, actually from 1989 to 2019, the number of new people attending churches in Manhattan grew by 100,000 people.
Wow.
And Manhattan is arguably the most influential island in human history.
Right.
And that the impact of that just reverberates all over the world.
That's amazing. We're in 2016. What happened there when it comes to movement?
In 2016, we had a gathering in New York that we call Movement Day Global Cities. It was done in relationship. I represented the Lausanne movement for cities for 11 years. And we invited leaders from all over the world to come to New York for a 3-day event called Movement Day Global Cities.
Yes.
We had leaders from 400 cities in 95 countries that came. And we were together for 3 days, and we provided lots of inspiration, but we also provided opportunity for leaders from regions to meet together. One city in Africa, Durban, brought 100 delegates.
Wow.
Africa brought 300 delegates. I remember there was an office in Pretoria that was coordinating 300 flights out of Africa into New York.
Wow.
We found housing for 500 people to have that event. And so during those 3 days, many groups were envisioned to do this in their own city. Well, coming out of 2016, we immediately began to work in places like Hong Kong, several cities across Africa. We had lots of conversations with people, particularly in Southern Europe and the Balkans, a number of North American cities as well. So a lot of momentum was picked up. We began traveling to places like Singapore and Indonesia. So there was, in Australia, there really was, London hosted an event in 2017 that brought together 1,000 Europeans from dozens of countries.
Amazing, amazing. Wow. So we're talking about 2017, London, or pre-pandemic, still pre-pandemic, right? So how did you see the impact of the pandemic in city movements around the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. The pandemic, obviously the pandemic prevented groups from meeting in person, but what it did do, it accelerated technology. And it was interesting, in our journey, we were planning to have a 10th anniversary gathering in 2020 in New York. We called it MDX. And obviously we couldn't meet in person, but we met virtually. And in that virtual meeting, we had leaders from 900 cities around the world. We couldn't have done that as an in-person.
Yeah.
So the pandemic really brought a lot of new leaders and cities into the conversation. Because there was such an inability to travel, people had much more discretionary time to join some of these conversations.
Yeah, that's awesome. So if you'd say today, what would be some of the traits or characteristics for leaders that would like to start a city movement like Movement Day?
Yeah. I think... well, first of all, I'll talk about kind of a theological foundation for this. I really believe, in my humble opinion, that there are only what I would consider to be 3 primary doctrines. The primary doctrine of salvation by faith alone in Jesus. Secondly is the authority of Scripture. But thirdly is the centrality and the necessity of unity of the church. And everything else, in my opinion, is a secondary doctrine. Baptism, communion, all kinds of other theological issues. And a leader of a city movement has to be absolutely committed to this idea that we never allow a secondary doctrine to violate a primary doctrine. So if we have that, Jesus, in Jesus' high priestly prayer, essentially what he is saying is that the unity of the church is our best apology to an unbelieving world. Paul's command in Ephesians 4 is to make every effort to keep the unity of the spirit of the bond of peace. And oftentimes, in a lot of city contexts, is that leaders they're making very minimal effort. One of the things that Tim Keller said at a breakfast that we had when we did our first Movement Day in Dallas, he said that if a leader is going to be impactful in their ministry and their leadership, they should really commit at least 15% of their time to their city. Outside of their own local responsibilities. One of the things that Tim wrote about in his book, Center Church, he created a diagram that we just call it the gospel ecosystem. And in the ecosystem, Tim wrote about 3 concentric circles. The The first circle is this idea of having a communication of the gospel that is contextually relevant to a city.
Yes.
The second ring is the centrality of church planting, which we've talked about. The third outer ring represents all the churches, all the nonprofits, all the initiatives that are happening inside of a city. And my comment on this ecosystem is that the vibrancy of the gospel in a city is in proportion to the depth of unity between different members of the same ecosystem.
Okay, so that's a very important point. I've heard you talk about it many, many times. And I like the way Keller put the gospel in the center of it, right? Because there's also a challenge that many movements start talking about unity, but maybe there's unity about some like political ideology or movement around some like social action or something that we love about, and we want to promote that. Understand we need to be unity around that, right? So how to deal with that, because I believe that with a movement like Movement Day, there's a lot of temptation to lean into one side or the other.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to understand as well that you have a city like São Paulo, a great city, fantastic churches here. It is possible to have a city with a lot of churches, but a very immature ecosystem. We have a city in the U.S. that has the greatest number of mega churches in the world, but also the greatest number of strip joints in America.
Wow.
So just because you have a lot of churches doesn't mean that the collective impact is anywhere near what it could be. Okay. And the reason that is, I believe, is because what makes Christianity is the incarnation. It is God among us.
Right.
And when Christian leaders in churches and organizations become more present to one another, I believe God becomes more present to the city.
Wow.
It's just a kind of a spiritual dynamic related to movements. And when we talk about movements, we ask the question, what precedes a movement? I think the first step toward a movement is for when a leader exercises humility. And humility is exercised when I'm willing to go attend something, be a part of something that is not my own thing.
Wow.
I want to join something that God is doing. I can be a part of. I don't have to be in charge of it. And for us, what's really anchored our prayer movement is a 35-year history of, we've had about 6,000 leaders and pastors that have gone away together for 48 hours to pray together, take communion together, build friendships together. And it is out of that, the engine of that community, relationships. So the sequence is humility, community, impact. That's really the sequence.
Love it.
And there has to be a high degree of intention. It's really almost what I call corporate spiritual disciplines. I think that movements require corporate spiritual disciplines. It's churches that are praying together, churches that read scripture together, churches that do mission together. That's really where in my opinion, you see the greatest amount of impact.
So make sure I got that right. When you talk about churches, you're talking about a local church doing it or a group of churches doing it together?
Well, a movement is manifest when you have a group of churches doing something together, churches, organizations.
Wow, amazing. Okay, so, wow, this is a masterclass. Thank you, Mac. But going back a little bit about Movement Day, going back to the formation of Movement Day, if you wanted to describe Movement Day to somebody that have never heard of it, right? How would you describe it?
Yep. Movement Day is a gathering of diverse faith leaders that represents pastors, nonprofit mission leaders, marketplace leaders, governmental leaders that really have a vision to see the prosperity of their city.
Okay.
And in the context of a Movement Day, we really want to answer three questions. The first question is, what are the 3 to 4 greatest challenges facing our cities? And this is what I would call a research-based question.
Okay.
The second question is a vision question, which is, what do we want to be true 10 years from now? When we did our first Movement Day, we declared that we wanted to see 10% of Manhattan become evangelical Christian. The third question is a tactical question. What do we need to do practically together this next year? That's really the exercise of the alliance, as it were. One of my favorite stories was when Charlotte did its very first Movement Day back in 2018. And there was an organization representing the vision to help children be at reading level at the third grade.
Right.
Because in the United States, if young people don't read at grade level by the third grade, that is the best indicator of how many prison cells to build in the future. This organization came into Movement Day with 10 churches that were working with them, and they left the day with 70.
Wow.
So Movement Day is designed to be both an incubator and a multiplier.
Okay.
And that's really our aspiration and the beauty of Movement Day is it's always designed by a city for a city.
Right.
It is not prescribed from somewhere else.
Wow, that's
and
amazing.
it really celebrates and affirms leadership within a city. And Movement Day is really designed to be more of what I would call a consultation than a conference. A consultation is really where you really want to have voices from inside your city that have expertise, they're people that you can journey with, and you really learn some things about your city that you didn't know before the Movement Day took place.
Ah, wonderful. So we're talking about faith leaders like at the church, marketplace, nonprofit, government. Can you unpack a little bit how it was in New York?
It's a great question. The first year we did Movement Day, we did it as a one-day gathering, and we were very fortunate. Tim, in the early days, Tim Keller agreed to speak every year. So Tim, we had no idea what a profound draw Tim was. We had a few other faculty, but to our surprise, the first year we had people from 34 states and 14 countries that showed up. So Movement Day out of the gate, in our context, almost became a global event. But basically, our initial model was we would have corporate presentations in the morning, worship time, teaching, always teaching about the city and the Bible, and then there would be presentations about a demographic, a challenge, something that brought research into the conversation.
Okay.
So that's in the morning, and then in the afternoon, in our model, we would have arenas of interest where there were people that had expertise, organizations that had expertise that would lead breakout conversations. It might be church planning, it might be working with the next generation, it might be working among the poor, it might be working in government. It just depended a little bit on what subject matter expertise we could access.
Yeah.
And so that was really I would say the first several years of how we organized this effort.
Amazing. In a city like São Paulo, there are many conferences, gatherings around city, and the city, church planting, things like that, right? But usually, marketplace leaders, they don't find that they fit in that kind of place, right? What would say is the importance of people in the market to be involved in the movement, and how could they be involved?
Yes. We found over the years that Christian marketplace leaders really are the critical success factor in forming a movement. And the reason that these marketplace leaders are so critical is that marketplace leaders have three distinctions that are different from nonprofit church leaders. Marketplace leaders have cultural influence because they're working in the market every day. They often are very strategic in terms of how they think and how they operate. And then lastly, they often bring philanthropic capacity to the conversation. Tim Keller introduced me to Bob Dahl back in 2010. Bob is probably the most visible Christian on Wall Street in the world. He has a newsletter that's read by 200,000 people every week. Every year he does his top 10 financial predictions that are published in the Wall Street Journal. He's been doing that for 40 years. He's on TV every week. And when Tim invited Bob to work with he and myself, Bob really became the third leg of the three-legged stool. So Tim was the minister, I was the missionary, and Bob was the marketplace leader. And we found these three perspectives and leadership expertise really made a very powerful synergy in how we think about the city and how we work together. Bob has continued to journey very closely with this. He's spoken on our behalf in Dubai and London and Washington, D.C. and Singapore and Jakarta. And it's been very exciting to see his ability to bring other marketplace leaders into the conversation. And I think for marketplace leaders in various city contexts, there's real value in having gatherings as a subset of Movement Day that are just concentrated on the marketplace, concentrating on the markets, what is the role. But there's also a place for pastors and nonprofit leaders to hear from marketplace leaders and their perspective. I have such admiration for people like Bob. Bob has been getting up every morning at 4:30 to do his trades every day for the last 40 years. And just to appreciate the work ethic of these marketplace leaders and just the demands on their lives. They have so much to bring and to give. They bring a level of credibility. And we've also found in the political space, this is a different kind of marketplace. In some U.S. cities, mayors have been our biggest fans because they see that we can mobilize. We can mobilize the church. We can mobilize volunteers. We can mobilize leaders into various spaces that oftentimes mayors don't have access to. Mayor of New York has come to our last 3 Movement Days. And we're a city of 9 million people, and Mayor Adams has really seen the value of the faith community and its impact on the city. In fact, when President Bush was elected, Bush 43 in the year 2000, he created a faith-based office, and the person who headed that office was a Princeton sociologist. His name was John DiLulio. And one of the things that DiLulio said in urban U.S. is you can determine the prospering or the decline of an urban neighborhood based on the presence or absence of a local church.
Wow. That's powerful. So in Brazil, we see that there's a tremendous growth of Christian presence and a lot of churches being started every day. But most of the churches are small churches in the most marginalized areas. And although there is an impact happening because of the aspect of community, people taking care of each other in the churches, and some Brazilian scholars even say about what they call sociological miracles that happens every day, but still it doesn't change many of great problems that we have. So how do we increase impact in a country where churches are growing and multiplying so fast?
There's a great theological paradigm around this. It's from the Old Testament. We look at 3 books of the Old Testament, all of which were written from modern-day Iran. We call them the Persian trilogy. It's Esther, Nehemiah, and Ezra. And when you look at these 3 leaders, they all these leaders had different assignments. You have Ezra, who was a priest, which would be like a modern-day pastor, and he was really about the spiritual renewal of the people. You have Nehemiah, who was a government official, very high position of influence, and he was able to leverage his understanding of the government, access to resources, to go to Jerusalem, hundreds of miles away, and completely rebuild the city. And then you have Esther. And the story of Esther is that the Jewish people were on the precipice of a genocide. What Esther had to do was risk her own life, and which resulted in the changing of a law. So what we have to do in our own societies is really ask the question: are there laws that need to be changed to bring about the betterment of society, and are there marketplace people in positions of influence, particularly as relates to government, that really can affect change and take on big projects? I have a colleague in New York right now, Dr. A.R. Bernard. He planted a church probably 40 years ago. Really, he was a son of the city, was a banking background, really very shrewd in understanding how the government makes decisions. And he noticed that the biggest challenge facing New York is affordable housing. He had a lot of people in his congregation that were policemen, firemen, teachers, who wanted to spend the rest of their life in New York, but upon retirement, they couldn't afford it anymore. So he got a vision to develop some property in what he calls the urban village.
Right.
And he was able to bring to the table the right developers, the right government involvement, and they're at the early stages of building. I believe it's 2,400 units of affordable housing. It's $1.2 billion project. It's the largest faith-based community development project, I think, in American church history, being done right in Brooklyn. But it's that's a kind of Nehemiah. It kind of combines Nehemiah and Esther, as it were, of knowing how to work within the governmental framework. He's on the board, one of the advisory boards of the governor of New York. So he's been really a brilliant practitioner of navigating both the faith space and the governmental space. We need leaders who know how to become fluent with the realities of local government. And Bishop Alexander, he and I have co-authored this book on faith and race, and he's working on a $500 million project in Charlotte, which is at its essence is to bring about economic renewal, job creation in his city. Because in Charlotte, which is very interesting, is that out of 50 cities in the U.S., Charlotte was ranked 50th out of 50 in terms of people migrating from poverty into the middle class.
Wow.
And there was a recognition that there were certain barriers that made that very difficult. And so this project, in a sense, is one of the responses to that reality.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. You mentioned Claude Alexander.
Yeah.
And Claude, tell us a little bit about Claude and your relationship with him.
So Claude grew up in Mississippi. He was born in, I believe, 1964. It was right in the middle of the civil rights movement. His stepfather was a medical doctor, and his stepfather was the medical doctor to Martin Luther King Jr. when King was in Mississippi. So growing up in Jackson, Mississippi, is also the city where Medgar Evers, who was a civil rights leader, was assassinated, and then Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968.
Right.
And then still living is John Perkins in the U.S. He's really the Moses of the reconciliation movement in the U.S. And when he was put in jail in Mississippi, Claude's stepfather was his medical doctor.
Wow.
So Claude really grew up with a front row seat to all of these conversations and these leaders. And Claude went on, he finished college, went to seminary. He started out in Pittsburgh, and then he came to Charlotte about 30 years ago. He became president of a group called the Hampton Ministers Conference, which meets in Virginia every June. It's the largest gathering of clergy anywhere in the world, I believe.
Wow.
And he was the president of that group, a fantastic communicator, orator. I met Claude in 2013 at a Lausanne event in Bangalore, and I just felt an immediate affinity. I have been living in New York for 40 years. I've always thought about, wrestled with the reality of faith and race. 90% of church attendees in New York City are either minority or immigrant. I've attended a church that speaks 60 languages. Out of 1,000 people in our church, if there were 10 white people, that would be a good Sunday.
Wow.
So we've been used to being, in a sense, minority in these environments. And then when Claude and I started talking, we just realized how significant the racial divide is in America. And there's lots of reasons for that. And we said, let's think through what can we talk about, what can we model in terms of this. And then in 2020 we had the George Floyd incident. George Floyd was murdered on Memorial Day. And then Claude and I determined to co-write this book together. And in the book, Claude tells his story, kind of what it was like, how his mom reacted the Saturday that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated and the impact of that on the African American community. So he writes about that growing up, and he writes, the thing that I really appreciate about Claude's story, in my 40 years at this, Claude's done the most effective storytelling of what it's meant to be an African American in America, and the whole history behind that. And one of the things that I think about a lot is that slavery came into the United States in 1619. African Americans did not have civil rights until 1964.
Right.
17 generations. I really invite a white audience to think about the cumulative impact of a lack of access to civil rights for 17 generations. One of, I believe, the legacy of slavery in America is the size of our prison population.
Okay.
We have 25% of the global prison population. The United States is the epicenter of the prison population globally.
Wow.
And in many ways, I believe it's a product of these disparities that lasted for 350 years. It's complex, and there's lots of factors behind that. But I just see this historic inequity in our own country, and when you get into the economic space, a white person has 9 times more access to capital than an African American.
Wow.
Which makes it almost impossible to start businesses and to hire people. And so these are all challenges that have such deep roots, and that I really feel like the faith community really needs to lean into together. Part of my own racial story is that I grew up in a state called South Dakota. It's in the Midwest. That's where my family's from. My family has owned a bank for 110 years.
Yeah.
My mother grew up in the South Carolina. South Carolina was the most pro-slavery state in the Union.
Wow.
In fact, my mother comes from a county that's 70% African American. So when I would visit my family in the South, I just saw the racial divide. It was very pronounced. I sensed very few relationships. Where I grew up 16 miles away from a Native American reservation, a small town there called Wagner. It had the highest unemployment of any community of any size in America at 80%. And the Native Americans in America have experienced almost genocidal kind of impact.
Yeah.
I think at one time there were 5 million Native Americans. I think there's now 250,000.
Wow.
And when you look at American history, after Thomas Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Territory and expanded our geography, one of the pieces of legislation was called the Homestead Act. And that Homestead Act, it provided, I think it was 40 acres for European immigrants that were traveling west.
Wow.
And one of the reasons that the Homestead Act was enacted is that it created a bit of a barrier against the Native American community. So there was almost a kind of a military influence in that decision. And over the years, laws, treaties have been made, treaties have been broken, and so so both African Americans and Native Americans have really experienced an enormous amount of injustice, and it's a very complex conversation.
Yeah.
Lots of attempts have been made, but it's just part of the environment that we're in.
Okay, and how does the book deal with that? I mean, in a context where people can look historically, and there are some, could kind of like feel the enmity, and like George Floyd situation escalated a lot of tension. What, according to you and Claude, would be a gospel way to deal with this?
We took a verse from the Old Testament. It's actually my life verse. It's Micah 6:8, in which God says, so that we essentially, that God commands us. It says we are required to walk humbly, to do mercy, and to love mercy, walk humbly, and to do justice. And that's really the antidote to all of this. And we've taken those commands, and when you study that passage in the original Hebrew, those 3 verbs attached to justice, mercy, and humility, they are written in the imperfect tense, which means these are three things that we are to never cease doing. They are part of the DNA of who we are. And in the book, at a more practical level, we say that this needs to translate into three practical exercises. The first exercise is the exercise of awareness. We need to develop a knowledge and to understand what have been the historic challenges and realities and dynamics. We're big believers in this idea that we can only love that which we know. Yeah. And part of our vision in the Movement Day space is we want Christians to be those that have the smartest people in the room with the biggest hearts. That's really, so understanding the racial journey of your city, of your nation, understanding what are the demographics, how many people live in poverty. I've always been fascinated by the reality of street children in Brazil. One of the great challenges that Brazil faces. So we need to be aware. We need to understand. We need to wrestle with all of this. We need to really understand what are the disparities. So that's at an awareness level. Second is ownership. What does it mean for me to take responsibility? This is the way things are, and what am I going to do about it? And in the book, we tell stories along the way. One of the stories around awareness is written about a white successful business guy. His name is Jack Alexander. When he realized the plight of African-American young men in Atlanta, he really took responsibility to mentor, to help young African-American men get to college, to really create opportunity and a future. He's joined a movement in Atlanta that's all about reconciliation on a massive scale. It's very exciting to see that. On the awareness side, I tell the story of the work that we've been doing in Virginia. It was in Jamestown, Virginia, when the first slaves arrived in 1619.
Okay.
So the city next to Jamestown is a city called Williamsburg. It's where the first capital of Virginia was. University of Williamsburg College, I think, is the second college in America. It's where George Washington and Thomas Jefferson all went. So a lot of history there. We had our first movement day there in 2019, which was the 400th anniversary of slavery. And that community, when COVID started just a few minutes later, that community committed to meet every Saturday on Zoom. Biracial community, learning from each other. And in the first 2 years of meeting, because of the relationships that were forming, there were 15 initiatives that were either incubated or accelerated. One initiative was addressing a food desert in the Norfolk area. And so there was a connection with United Way, and there were tens of thousands of pounds of food that were delivered to people that previously had no access. We saw some educational initiatives, work with local schools, mentoring that took place. There were small groups that were organized to really talk about the dynamics of race. They were called B-Care groups around. They were authentic conversations around race. So this all happened within 2 years in this one community. And then the third, so we have awareness, we have ownership, and then thirdly, we have what we call agency. What can we do about something? And in the book, Claude talks about different kinds of agency. We have personal agency, things that we have control over that we can do. There's political agency, how we vote or choose to get involved in politics. There is what we call pecuniary, or where we invest resources into various causes. And then there's a few other forms. And one initiative that we've been involved with is what we call Inspire Equity. It's helping minority small businesses develop the technical assistance they need to become eligible for capital. Accessing capital really is the critical success factor to growing a business. So right now we have 25 small businesses in Charlotte that are part of a pilot where they'll get training and coaching, and then the expectation is that at the end of the year they will have achieved a certain milestone organizationally where they will be able to access bank loans to grow their business. So it's a one city pilot right now, but if it works, We'd love to scale it to 50 cities across America.
Amazing.
And it's a way for churches of all different ethnic backgrounds to be involved together and to help each other. And you know, we say the first thing people need after Jesus is a job.
Yeah.
So this is very important in the development of these cities.
Amazing. Back to the strategy of Movement Day, one of the biggest initiatives that you advocate is the scholars program.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes. The origin of scholars really came out of my observation from about 2015 to 2019. I traveled to about 35 cities around the world, and one of my observations was that most city movements are led either by a motivated individual or by a really small organization.
Okay.
And that what these leaders and organizations need is what we call muscularity, more capacity to lead on a larger scale. And I looked at my own journey, starting out as an individual missionary, then building an organization, and I asked myself, what were the critical steps along the way?
Okay.
Doing my graduate work with Ray Bakke was very important because that gave me an understanding, it gave me language.
Right.
It exposed me to best practices. And then obviously my work with Tim Keller, seeing an idea scale. And really the Scholars Program really is a convergence of things I've learned from both Ray Bakke and Tim Keller. And we also created, prior to Scholars, we created a program for New York leaders called Advanced Leadership Intensive.
Yeah.
And that was that had some skill development components to it. It's just not theology, but it's really knowing how to build an organization.
Okay.
So the way Scholars is designed, it's a 3-level training. And what's distinctive about it is that you do it as a cohort of leaders from the same city. And then toward the end of your program, together, you create a 10-year plan for your city together.
Okay.
And what informs there are 5 pedagogical values in the training. One is spiritual depth.
Okay.
We believe that the width of our influence is in proportion to the depth of our intimacy with God.
Wow.
So that's a very high value. So we introduce something called Lectio Divina, it's reflective Bible reading. Secondly, is we really want leaders to become subject matter experts on their city.
Yeah.
We believe that you can only love that which you know, and the more you know about your past, the more you'll care about your future.
Yeah.
So we want everybody to be fluent with the history of their city, the demographics, the challenges, the successes, and to be able to articulate that. Thirdly, is we want people to be fluent with the theme of the city in the Bible.
Yeah.
We really think the New Testament is really the story of Jesus going to die in Jerusalem as the religious capital of the world and Paul going to die in Rome as the political capital of the world. That these two cities represented great intention on the parts of Jesus and Paul. They were not accidental. And it was out of the influence of Rome and Jerusalem that the early church was birthed.
Right.
And within 300 years, the Christian movement grew to 20 million people. And it grew, I think, significantly because of the influence of these two cities and other influential cities in West Asia and Southern Europe. So that's part of our value in terms of understanding cities theologically and historically. Fourthly is how do we build alliances in our cities? How do we get marketplace people involved? How do we get women in leadership involved? How do we get next gen involved? So we talk about the art of putting alliances together to help advance whatever needs to happen in a city. And then finally, what does it take to build a robust decadal plan for your city?
Okay.
What does that look like? And I've been very pleased by, the program is 5 years old. We're coming up on our 5th anniversary. We've had over 1,500 leaders in the program. Some of our early graduates, probably our most robust plans have come out of the city of Chennai in India. They're in the process of planting 4,000 new churches.
Wow.
We have a very committed marketplace leader who is building a network of 1,000 job-creating marketplace Christians. And that's very important in India because in India, you have 100,000 young people joining the workforce every day.
Yeah.
And so this helps the church be relevant in a country where there's tremendous persecution, there's tremendous Hindu nationalism, And creating jobs, creating employment for other people is a fantastic way to build the church. And these are all leaders that were inspired by the Scholars Program.
Awesome. So you're talking a little bit about the Lectio Divina, and I was gonna ask exactly that. I mean, leading so many efforts and so many initiatives, how to keep your soul, your spirit healthy?
Yeah. It's really important. You know, as I've gotten older, I've really been convinced that well, I'm convinced of two things: that whatever your weaknesses are, your weaknesses tend to calcify as you get older. But as you get older, you also develop what is called it's a calcification of knowledge. You know things just from experience that are very important. But most importantly, if a leader is going to have continued influence and growing influence, it will be as a result of a person's spiritual roots going deeper. And that means different things for different people. For me, has meant the last 15 years, one of my disciplines is I read the Bible every 90 days. I journal through the Bible. Okay. And the reason I do that is that I found it important to keep the big themes of Scripture and history in front of me. Creation, fall, redemption, consummation. And to be able to read that through every 90 days and reflect on it, it gives me a greater and greater appreciation of how God is at work in history. And it really makes the Bible come alive. I read parts of the Bible that if I didn't do this, I'd never read them. And it just gives me an appreciation for how God is at work. And my favorite, I would say over the years, my favorite metaphor for God is God really is the great choreographer. Okay. That he's been choreographing 4,000 years of history really to fulfill the promise he gave to Abraham back in Genesis 12. And that all of us, I believe, can see the arc of our own lives against that 4,000-year-old promise.
Wow. Amazing. What's the vision for the future?
Well, we believe that there's enough interest and talent that we can see collective impact on 1,000 cities around the world. In the last year, our footprint has grown from 100 cities to 200 cities, 300 cities. Okay. And we think, depending on how things unfold, that could grow by about 150 new cities every year. We're on a trajectory to grow to 500 cities in South Asia. Okay. We have a pathway to 200 cities in Africa. I think right here in Brazil, we've already interacted with leaders from 80 cities, and you would know better than me the potential, but I would think anywhere from 100 to 200 cities is possible here. And then we have growing expressions in the Middle East right now, very active. We've helped initiate a conversation called SG 500, which is looking at the 500 largest cities in Asia every September in Singapore. And that's very important because Asia is 60% of the planet. Yeah. And in Asia, there are 4.4 billion people outside of Christianity. Wow. And that number is 1.1 billion more than the combined population of the other 5 continents. Wow. So it really is breathtaking.
It is.
And if only 2% of Asia became Christian in a decade, it would be 100 million people. And yet 47 of the 50 countries in Asia are hostile to Christianity.
Right.
Outside of South Korea, Singapore, Philippines, and then you have a few other, maybe Cyprus, and you have some other countries that are in there. But it's exciting, it's daunting. But I'm very hopeful. God just seems to be bringing a number of leaders and movements together. So it's an exciting day to be alive.
Awesome, great. And what are your thoughts? And just for us as we're closing, what are your thoughts and feelings about Brazil, the role of Brazil? How do you see it? And our expectations about São Paulo and Brazil?
part of my interest in Brazil is rooted in I have a Brazilian son-in-law. Married my oldest daughter 13 years ago, and it's been fascinating for me just to get to know Lucas and his faith journey. He's a first-generation Christian, fantastic person, fantastic father, husband, and through the prism of his life, I've been very interested in what God has been doing in Brazil. I've met some leaders years ago from São Paulo, and I've been really fascinated by the spectacular growth of the church in Brazil. I believe 3% evangelical in 1970, could be a majority evangelical by 2050. I wrote a chapter about the influence of Luis Palau, and I saw that the growth of Christianity in South America completely paralleled his career. And in looking at Brazil, in my research, I saw that there are more evangelicals in church on a Sunday than Catholics. And Brazil is the second largest Catholic church in the world. So just very fascinated by all of that, and then meeting persons like yourself and Leandro over the years, and just I've really appreciated the energy of the Brazilian church, just the real desire to adopt some best practices, and because Brazil is one of 5 countries in the world with the largest number of cities of 100,000 people, along with India, China, Japan, and the United States. So Brazil really is a demographic center of the world. São Paulo is the biggest city in the Western Hemisphere, very strategic, and I really believe that the Brazilian church, if not already, has the potential to be the greatest mission-sending church in the globe, just by virtue of the growth, the energy. It takes a lot to steward, of course, but there's really extraordinary impact, but also extraordinary potential.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mac. Nós terminamos aqui então a nossa conversa com o Dr. Mac Pier. Você pode conhecer mais sobre o Movement Day e os livros do Dr. Mac Pier também. Nós temos aqui o livro A Exigência, que é da Editora Vida e Caminho, e que conta a história da relação dele com Claude Alexander e a visão dele sobre reconciliação racial, mas há muitos outros livros falando sobre o movimento. Você pode ir para o nosso Instagram, Movement Day SP, para conhecer mais sobre o que estamos fazendo em São Paulo, e também outros movimentos em Brasil, como em Natal, por exemplo, junto com a Missão Aleph, e estamos começando relacionamentos com outras cidades para estender essas iniciativas e ver o impacto da igreja brasileira, não só aqui no Brasil e nas grandes cidades, mas também no mundo todo. Deus abençoe e obrigado por nos acompanhar. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
That was awesome.
Well, I hope